Trump warns Moscow, claiming Russia avoided really bad consequences only thanks to him. Putin doesn't realize he's playing with fire. Trump's message leaves little room for misinterpretation until he posts the opposite tomorrow morning. Russia Today saying Trump is hot and cold. He's a phone. Anyway, let's get back to Trump considering new sanctions against Russia as he grows more furious with Putin.
What happened to Russia had it not been for him?
You know, it's really hard to know. I mean, maybe he is thinking that the United States would continue to support Ukraine and send more arms and ammunition, air defenses. Although I think Congress probably had pretty much had its fill of that, Jake. Certainly, there would have been more sanctions, and the $300 billion that the Russians inexplicably left in European banks would now be in the hands of Ukraine. But the fact of the matter is, Jake, he keeps saying we're going to be sanctions, there's this and that, but he hasn't really done anything that would hurt Vladimir Putin in the slightest. In fact, he all but exempted him from the tariffs.
Yeah, the Liberation Day tariffs. Do you think that there is any amount of sanctions that would prompt Putin to stop the war?
It's pretty hard to imagine that. First of all, this is in Putin's mind pretty existential. He's lost, a huge number of people, up to 1 million by some estimates, maybe a bit fewer who are both wounded or dead. It's a point right now where there aren't that many more sanctions the West can put on Russia. I mean, even in the best of days, there wasn't much we bought from Russia. The only thing that could really hurt them is if the U.S. and the Europeans were able to cut off the purchases of Russian oil and gas that China and India are making. And I'm not sure that President Trump's willing to go do that.
You wrote an analysis about Trump's exasperated message on Sunday when Trump said that Putin has, quote, gone absolutely crazy. Trump has historically shown great deference to Putin. You say, quote, missing from Mr. Trump's zigzags is an explanation of why he has been unable to use his relationship with Mr. Putin to persuade him to halt the violence, even for a 30-day ceasefire, unquote. Why do you think, David, why do you think Trump has not been able to leverage his relationship with Putin?
Well, you may remember, Jake, that back during the campaign and even during the Obama administration, in the run-up to President Trump's first campaign, he said Vladimir Putin doesn't respect Obama or Biden, and he respected Mr. Trump, and therefore that's why this could get solved in 24 hours. He's discovered that he had a 2-hour conversation with Vladimir Putin last Monday, and the result this weekend was the biggest air attack on Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine that we've seen during 3 years of war, mostly aimed at civilians. So clearly he has overestimated what his influence on Vladimir Putin is, and you're seeing that in the kind of frustrated tweets he's sending out and in his comments to reporters. But the question is, what's he willing to back that up with?
Yeah, totally. On this crazy charge, when Trump said that Putin's gone absolutely crazy, let's dive into that for 1 second, because Putin has long wanted Russia to flex its muscles. He's long thought the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest disaster in the history of the 20th century. He said that. But there is this craziness question. In 2022, after the invasion of Ukraine, I spoke with French President Emmanuel Macron about Putin and why he started this war. Macron talked about those two other elements that I just mentioned. He also talked about the lack of respect that he thinks Russia gets from the world. But he also talked about this other thing about his psyche. Take a listen.
I would say this is a post-COVID-19 consequence. Isolation.
Because he's been so isolated?
I think so. Post-COVID-19, there was a totally new situation. So he had a window of opportunity, and he decided to completely break the linearity of this situation and go to the war.
It sounds good when he says it with his French accent, but he's basically saying that that Putin went a little nuts during isolation and COVID. And I've heard that from a number of world leaders. What about you?
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. But there's also nothing in Vladimir Putin's recent behavior, accelerating the war while talking about how he'd be willing to do a ceasefire under the following 9 conditions, that's inconsistent with things that he has done, at least since the invasion of Crimea in 2014, which also seemed crazy to us, right? So, the president being surprised that Vladimir Putin is acting as a brutish authoritarian who's invading a nearby country or a bordering country, I mean, there's not a whole lot new there. We are horrified by seeing what Russia's doing, but were you really surprised?
You've covered Trump for many years. Trump and Putin, his handling of it. What's your takeaway with this uptick in rhetoric, and will that uptick in rhetoric be met with action?
I'm not sure it means a thing other than he has a reason to use a lot of capital letters right now. Crazy in
he likes to do
letters.
that.
Not just bad, but really bad in capital letters. Look, when I talk to national security sources and State Department folks, the Kremlin, let's face it, doesn't seem worried. Vladimir Putin seems to feel very confident that he's holding all the cards. A couple of weeks ago, someone compared it to Lucy and Charlie Brown and the football, with Lucy being Putin. So, look, we're hearing about sanctions. We're seeing these posts. Vladimir Putin does not seem to want.
Russia called Trump emotional over his tweet. I mean, they ain't wrong. Listen, when they're cooking, they're cooking. You know what I mean? Are they wrong, though? Probably one of the few instances where they're not wrong. Trump is a very emotional guy. Have libs gone completely insane from lack of materials analysis? Between this and the New York Times saying the U.S. can't bring back iPhone manufacturing because Chinese women have smaller hands. I've just about heard every nonsense under the sun. Yeah, that was my favorite. The New York Times saying that Chinese women have tiny hands and therefore their delicate fingers are better for high precision manufacturing. They did say that.
Want to change what he's doing in Ukraine, and until he does, I'm not sure these posts mean much of anything.
But there is this bipartisan pressure that is now growing.
Right.
Where we're at now, President Trump warns Moscow, claiming Russia avoided really bad consequences only thanks to him. Putin doesn't realize he's playing with fire. Trump's message leaves little room for misinterpretation until he posts the opposite tomorrow morning. Russia Today saying Trump is hot and cold. He's a phone. By the way, rockets only do this when they're under major stress. Okay, so don't laugh. You're laughing, but like, rockets only do this when they're under great distress. I'm a rocket expert.
Every minute I see of this.
Yeah, I mean, what I mean by other, basically when the ship started tumbling, as soon as something was obviously not nominal, that is traditionally when
we had lost attitude control of the ship and entered into a spin. The team made the call to do what's called passivate the vehicle, so we're essentially venting all of the remaining propellant overboard, and it's going to make an uncontrolled reentry. Important to note, this is a contingency that is planned for, and we clear the zones in the Indian Ocean where these entries could take place.
For more sanctions, as you're referring to, there's this bill that Senator Lindsey Graham has with Senator Richard Blumenthal in the Senate. It has more than 80 co-sponsors, and there's a push for a vote on that. Essentially, snap in sanctions, primary and secondary sanctions on Russia could be significant. This is what Senator Grassley, Chuck Grassley, the longest-serving Republican senator, said. He said in 2 posts on X, he said, "I believe President Trump was sincere when he thought his friendship with..."
I love the way Chuck Grassley tweets. He's literally the oldest senator. He's the oldest congressperson. And he sometimes tweets like a child, like enough. Takes against Harvard, like letters missing. 95 years old, by the way.
Putin would end the war. Now that being the case, it's time for sanctions strong enough so Putin knows game over. He went on to say in a second tweet today, President Trump should take the decisive action against Putin that he takes against Harvard. Sanctions for Putin like no.
You need to refund the points, brother. I don't know how to do that. I don't think there's any way to do that on the next run. Okay, calm
Fed
down.
transfer Harvard, as Chuck Grassley's famous shorthand on X. But nevertheless, I mean, will Trump act facing these calls from Republicans?
Well, I think the president's very clearly frustrated with Vladimir Putin. And we have to remember that Russia has basically one product, right? They sell oil and gas products mostly to Europe and Asia. And so a round of sanctions can hit Russia pretty quickly and hurt them pretty badly. They can't make money if oil drops to $50 a barrel. Putin begins to bleed muscle at that point. So I think Trump will probably consider sanctions because he's clearly decided that his previous approach is not getting where he wants to be.
I think it's worth noting this is essentially the Biden administration's approach to this conflict, one that Trump, pilloried on the campaign trail, said that he would come in on day one and would be able to end the conflict.
He even criticized sanctions at the time.
He did, absolutely. And now he's sitting in the seat.
He signed sanctions too.
But now he's sitting in the seat. We're making where he's having to deal with the reality of the tough decisions, and his policy is looking a whole lot like what the Biden administration tried to do. So, I think it's also interesting. You talk about Republicans and Grassley. We know that a lot of Republicans who had a lot.
American foreign policy is unchanging. What did I tell you? I told you. Oh my God. How shocking. There's only one alternative here. Either you, I don't know, fucking destroy NATO and allow European countries to send in their own troops, or you literally force Ukraine to lower its conscription age to 18 while simultaneously engaging in the mass deportation of Ukrainian men living in the Western world that have gotten refugee status, forcing them into the front lines. Anything short of this is not going to change the dynamic of the battlefield. Sure, you give satellite targeting capabilities and long-range targeting capabilities to the Ukrainians. They start hitting Russian Air Force, Russian airspace. They start hitting inside of Russian territory. Okay. Then Russia, in retaliation, goes nutty mode again and starts bombing Lviv and starts bombing Kyiv extra hard. Maybe starts doing more hacking and all different sorts of weird shit that they do to European countries because they're mad. But ultimately, Hasan's so mad. What? Why would I be mad? What? Do I seem mad about this? You okay?
A lot of misgivings about Trump's approach to the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. We're absolutely willing to say on the campaign trail, that they were fine with where Trump was going, and now there's I think there's a reckoning.
They are already doing that. What are you talking about? What they're fucking doing mass deportations of Ukrainian men to send them to the front lines? Is that what is happening in Europe? Maybe I'm not aware of something that you're aware of. Look at their Hasan mad. Look at their PFP. What is this? Bro, what I don't understand is, you don't really understand politics, which is fine. Okay, that's okay. But, how do you not understand how human emotion is conveyed? I'm not even angry. I don't even understand.
I think one of the big things too here is this is personal for President Trump. He has prided himself, and part of the brand around Trump is the art of the deal. That is something I still consistently hear supporters. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, swing area, and talking to folks who voted for Trump. Part of what they want to see is him really cutting deals, making things happen, whether that's on tariffs and trade or that's on Ukraine. That is something that he, again, has touted is part of the persona. So this chips away at that if he is not able to deliver on some kind of progress, on some kind of movement on this war.